Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jelena Petrovic, and I will be moderating the following conversation with the Montenegrin Prime Minister Igor Luksic. He comes from a region which is rightfully known as the Powder Keg, and he leads one of the smallest and the youngest countries in Europe, which has had a very interesting and sometimes challenging path to go from the painful 90s to the very successful late 2000s, being one step away from the NATO membership and approaching an EU one as well. Mr. Luksic holds a PhD in economics from Podgorica University. His remarkable career includes serving as an MP in Serbian and Montenegrin parliament. Then he was also the public advisor to the Prime Minister before taking over the spot at the Ministry of Finances on multiple terms, as many as 5. And he also served twice as the Deputy Prime Minister before obtaining the position of the Prime Minister in 2010. So without further ado, I will ask him to take over the floor and to share with us this amazing story of Montenegro's path from the state union with Serbia to where it is right now, challenges that you have faced on that path, and where do you see Montenegro in the future?
Well, thank you very much, Jelena. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, let me say that I'm very glad to be here with you today and talk to Young Atlanticist Council, organized by Atlantic Council and Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It's great to be back and talk to Atlantic Council audience, because I still remember great event I had half a year ago while officially visiting Washington back in October last year. It was a great chance to exchange views with distinguished audience about the experience of Montenegro and prospects of my country. Also, I understand from previous speakers that the audience here is quite direct with questions, enthusiastic about the questions, so I'll try to make it not too long introductory. But I'd like to point out first of all that it is interesting that actually tomorrow we're celebrating the 6th independence anniversary, and it time-wise corresponds with the Chicago Summit of NATO. And it is actually a great message because today Montenegro is here. It is one of the ISAF contributors. It is aspiring to become full-fledged NATO member, and Montenegro is already running second membership action plan, which is just one step before the full membership. We also hope to have good language from the communique of the Chicago Summit, and it is quite remarkable that it is only 6 years since we regained independence. Montenegro is obviously a small country. It has gone through difficult 90s. It has gone through difficult first decade of the 21st century. But we, I think, are capable with dealing with challenges, as we have shown in the past. There is basically two sets of priorities my country has. First of all, it is a foreign agenda which is comprised of the integration processes. Montenegro aspires to become EU member state and aspires, as I have already said, to become NATO member state. And also there is a great deal of challenges in the internal sphere, because we are running through the economic cycle, which is very difficult. After several years of expansion, now we are going out of the recession and consequences of the recession. And as you know, European situation with public finances is very hard and actually impedes any country's ambition to grow again at some decent rates. But in principle, there is no possibility in mid to long run to have foreign success and internal disillusionment or disappointments. Basically, those two lines of action should go hand in hand together. And I'm very proud that we have gone a long way through the European integration process already. Actually, we hope next month to start accession talks with the European Union. We hope that late June we will be able to open accession talks with the European Commission on chapters of 23 and 24, which deal with the judiciary, the rule of law, battling organized crime, corruption, and based on the new model that European Commission has designed for the Western Balkan countries who aim at becoming member states of the EU at some point in time. The point is that already at this stage we should open those chapters, and based on the progress in those chapters we will be able to open other chapters of the negotiations and help lift any sort of a concern that Western Balkan countries, including Montenegro, are unable to deal with that sort of challenges. At the same time, building building our institutions, building the rule of law, strengthening the rule of law, improving the legal security and legal background of our country. It also helps economic situation, because investors are more willing to come, strategic investors are interested to invest, and it all helps growth of the economy. Second obvious priority, as I have already said, is the NATO. We believe that in the Western Balkans, those two integration processes simply go hand in hand together. Country, in order to be politically stable and economically prosperous, it has to be a secure country. And NATO is the institution that brings about security. NATO remains guarantor of peace and stability in the region of the Western Balkans. We remember still vividly the developments of the 90s. Montenegro, fortunately, was the only country in the Western Balkans, basically, or actually ex-Yugoslav republic, that did not suffer war. But we suffered a lot of consequences of the wars in the region. It gave a boost to organized crime, it helped also corruption, and economic situation was very difficult because of the UN sanctions. So transition was delayed. Transition from central planned economy to market economy was simply delayed. So we had a lot to catch up with, and it was the first decade of the 21st century that we had to deal with. Basically the transition, and we are now almost over with it. Or I should say, I think we are over with the transition from central planned to market economy. But that's what makes NATO integration important, and that's why EU and NATO go hand in hand together. And in certain terms, those two integration processes actually tend to overlap, because if you aspire to become a NATO member, it is also important to introduce the rule of law institutions. It is also important to show capacity to battle organized crime, corruption, and so on. And from the European point of view, it is, as I have already said, opening of the door for other segments of the society to change. Currently, Montenegro, and that's one of the reasons why we are here, is one of the ISAF contributors. Along with the defense reforms, which have been quite intensive in the past several years, we have also showed preparedness to take part in peacekeeping missions. And currently, Montenegrin soldiers proudly serve along with the NATOs in Afghanistan. We also take part in Liberia peacekeeping mission. Our police is also present in Cyprus peacekeeping mission, and our Navy officers are active in Somalia Straits mission. So we are ready to commit resources to help certain processes. And we believe by showing responsibility for the global tendencies and global affairs, it also helps Montenegro become more visible, become reliable and trusted partner, and I believe we have built solid track record in those terms. It is unavoidable that to talk about economy these days. The crisis of the Eurozone obviously affects all the countries in the Western Balkans, and it affects Montenegro. The crisis with Euro is something that brings concerns to everybody, and the current state of affairs with with Greece, and what might be deterioration in the financial markets in other parts in Europe definitely brings concerns. We've seen in past 7 to 8 years, we've seen economic cycle in full. Our economy started to grow significantly from 2004 onwards. In the period immediately after the independence, from 2006 till 2008, we were growing at about 9% in average. We had budget surplus. We were one of the leaders by foreign direct investments per capita in Europe. And all of a sudden, that cycle was cut short because of the asset burst and the financial crisis we saw in the world late 2008. It simply prolonged into economic crisis, and now we're still dealing with the consequences. Currently, it is the crisis of the public finances, and since the very first moment of the beginning of the crisis, we have been aware that it has to be 3 pillars economic policy. One is obviously fiscal adjustment. Country has to keep in good order public debt, budget deficit, and I'm glad that this year Montenegro belongs to a rare group of countries, belongs to a group of rare countries in today's Europe that will have public debt and budget deficit within Maastricht criteria, which is budget deficit below 3% and public debt at about 50%. Interestingly enough, when you look at the economic cycle, I remember back in 2004, our public debt stood at 46%. So now at the end of the economic cycle, it's about 50%. It shows that in the meantime, we were kept aware about the need for fiscal prudence. In terms of long-term competitiveness, there is 2 more pillars of the economic policy. One is structural agenda, and the other one is agenda which deals with investments and investment environment. In the field of structural reforms, we have already dealt with the pension reform. Last year, we dealt with the labor reform, and we are at hand of passing the new social protection policy. And there is obviously more to be done in the field of health, in the field of education, all in order to have long-term competitive economy. And obviously, there is a business improvement agenda, which is required if we want to combine fiscal responsibility with growth policies. It is the only way through the crisis, and it is the only way to regain competitiveness, have more jobs, and sustain growth. I think I should stop here, but I would be very happy if there are some questions on the region to provide you with certain comments on that. And as I believe that Western Balkans region is from the political point of view still very important part of Europe, requires attention, and on the other hand, I think we have significant economic potential to tap. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister Luksic, for this very informative overview of Montenegro's path towards NATO and EU membership and challenges that your country is facing. Before I open the floor for the questions from my fellow delegates, I would like you to answer, if you do not mind, one question of mine. Would you be so kind to share with us your views of main obstacles for successful regional cooperation in defense matters?
I think what matters is that most of the countries in the Western Balkans are aspiring to become NATO members, or they're already inside NATO, such as Croatia, Albania, Slovenia. Of course, I mean, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and so on. But referring to the Western Balkans, it is obvious that most of the countries share that priority. And that opens up a maneuvering space to improve defense cooperation. I think one of the best examples is that we have so-called Adriatic Charter A5, which is security integration, regional integration framework. And through that framework, we have designed models of participation into the security transition in Afghanistan, for example. So it is not only that we have a contingent of soldiers there, in case of Montenegro, it's about 37 people, but it is also instructors that already serve in Kabul through this framework and help security transition in that country. It's a good experience, and it may serve as a good experience, a good platform for some other cases in future to come. So definitely, the fact that most of the countries, or almost all of the countries, aspire to become member states of the NATO help cooperation in the field of defense. Currently, Montenegrin coast is the only in the northern Mediterranean which is still not part of the NATO. Of course, Bosnia and Herzegovina had some small costs, but from the strategic point of view, I think we have something to also bring into the NATO from the security point of view, and we are looking forward to any sort of other types of participation.
Thank you. So, if there are any questions from the audience, now would be a great time. Spela.
The question you're probably going to get a lot. Spela Krajins from Slovenia, in case you didn't hear me. I'm a Young Atlanticist. This is a question you're probably going to get a lot in the upcoming days. But with Nikolić's win in Serbia, I'd like to hear your comments. And since we are in a NATO environment, especially since that is one country in the Balkans that is not on a NATO track and does not want to be on a NATO track, is there any fear from your side that there might be some populist tensions of using this or blocking your country on its way? And how do you see this developing? Thank you.
Well, we have just learned the news that in the runoff, Mr. Nikolić won the presidency in Serbia. And I should congratulate. I think it was the outcome of the democratic process, and that's what matters. Serbia shows capability of changing governments, and we are still to see what's out of the cabinet and who actually the prime minister will be now that Nikolić is going to be the president of the country. I don't expect any sort of deterioration in the relationship between Serbia and Montenegro. I think that cooperation will continue, and I'm sure that President Nikolić will be interested in promoting cooperation between our countries. Obviously, Serbia is the only country that has not said to share NATO aspiration in the region. Serbia shares the EU aspiration. And for us, it is important that Serbia continues to play a role of a country which is crucial for the stability in the region. And for us, it is important that Serbia continues to play a constructive role in the neighborhood relations and the regional relations. That is important also from the future talks between Belgrade and Pristina. It is also important from the economic recovery point of view, and so on and so on. Being the biggest country in the region, it has impact and the developments in Serbia have impact over other countries. But I'm pretty sure that the cooperation between my government and President Nikolić should actually continue to be to the benefit of both countries.
Next question, please.
Mr. Prime Minister, my name is Adam Shupak. I'm a Chicago Young Professional representative. First of all, welcome to Chicago, and we hope you enjoy your stay here. I wanted to ask about the unresolved situations in Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and hear your perspective about whether those situations complicate Montenegro's bid to join NATO and to join the EU.
A year and a half ago, we had the situation in which Croatia was not sure to end accession talks. Serbia was desperately bogged down with the Hague Tribunal problems, or looked so. Bosnia did not have government. We had suspension, basically, of talks between Belgrade and Pristina. Macedonia was also in a sort of a political turmoil. Even Albania had certain problems. Montenegro was asked to meet 7 benchmarks, which were not easy, all related to political reforms, political system reforms. I should remind the audience that it was related to the rule of law, organized crime, corruption, freedom of media, human rights, public administration reform, cooperation with the civil sector, and so on. So after several months, we saw Croatia inside the EU, it will be, soon formal part of the EU. It's almost there, formally speaking. Against the suspicion of many, Montenegro has managed to meet successfully 7 benchmarks of the European Commission. And I hope that in the next weeks, the European Commission's report will renew the recommendation to open accession talks next month. Serbia has been successful in concluding arrangement with Kosovo of regional representation, though some people are unhappy how it is implemented, but we have agreement. Also, situation in Albania has stabilized. And in the meantime, also Bosnia and Herzegovina got its central government, and there's been certain progress in dealing with some outstanding issues which impede their progress towards EU and NATO. I believe actually that Montenegrin progress puts positive pressure on some other countries in the region. Montenegro could serve really as a good example. I remember half a year ago, in attempt to meet some of the benchmarks, it was elections law. We conducted dialogue over educational language in Montenegro. You know, in our countries, who are all complex, heterogeneous countries, it's not easy sometimes to resolve those matters. But we conduct dialogue, government and the opposition, and we managed to reach a solution. And I should assure you that that sort of a solution could be equal quality related to the issues of the constitutional arrangement in Bosnia, or some issues, or issue of name in Macedonia, and so on. I think we showed maturity in coming to the solution, making compromise, being able to make compromise. And I think that sort of behavior, that sort of the model which we may export, actually puts positive pressure on some other countries in the region. So instead of thinking that issues in countries in the region should hamper Montenegrin progress towards EU and NATO, I should like to think the other way around. I think it actually not only helps Montenegro, but actually helps other countries in the region.
Please.
Mr. Prime Minister, my name is Joseph Quinn. I represent DePaul University here in Chicago. I was able to work at the European Union last year for Marian John Marinescu. He is a delegate of the Balkan session. And I would just like to ask, what steps has Montenegro taken in terms of the trafficking of illegal individuals? Thank you.
Well, number of steps, and not only that particular field, but actually in principle in all the fields which are dealing with battling organized crime and corruption. I think there is several layers of activities. One is pretty much under the spotlight right now these days. It is constitutional amendments to actually meet recommendations of the Venice Commission in order to further strengthen the position of independent judiciary. Actually, by working on that, we are in those terms ahead of many EU countries that have still not actually walked that far. But we are ready to do so because we are aware that there is a certain perception of Western Balkan countries, and we need to do more and actually serve as a model that some other countries could use. Secondly, there is the layer of pieces of legislation, up-to-date pieces of legislation. We passed, first prepared in cooperation with the civil sector in Montenegro, under the close scrutiny of the European Commission. Those pieces of legislation were passed last year, now under implementation, who also help build institutions that could deal with any sort of problem, including that particular one. And then there is a lot of operational activities which show our commitment to pursue organized crime, bring felons to justice, and seize their assets, and so on, by implementing the best possible standards. I'm actually quite proud to talk to a lot of European ambassadors or people from the European Commission who think that Montenegro has actually strode in the field of battling organized crime and corruption. Of course, there is a lot to be done, and we remain vigilant, and that remains our priority. As I said, actually, we are quite happy to start accession talks with chapters 23 and 24 because it helps lift any sort of a concern already at the beginning of the process, because then it enables country move swifter through other chapters.
I'm afraid we have time only for one more question, so.
Thank you very much. My name is Ari Schroyer. I'm a student of political science at Roosevelt University. Welcome to Chicago, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you.
My question has to do with sort of what you were talking about a moment ago. Your country is serving as a model for the rest of Europe. I know, unfortunately, smaller geographic states don't always get the attention they might deserve, especially when it comes to the innovation that they have to use simply because they have less resources than other states. I wonder if you could talk about the other innovations that Montenegro is involved in. I think it could really be a model for the other states because they know currently their resources will be lessened in the next decade, if not sooner, and perhaps they too can evolve to a newer business model.
Well, from the business point of view, I think that it is incredibly important to resist some populist tendencies. And I think we have managed so for the time being, because social justice is something that many people claim to be the right sort of in times of the hardship. And unless we realize that social justice is about who works more should earn more, and those socially vulnerable should be provided certain entitlements, then unless we realize that, we risking getting into totally different area, which is pretty much improvisation, and that could lead to economic disaster. Therefore, it is important that we continue committing efforts into, again, fiscal adjustment, structural reforms, and improvement of the business environment. From the business point of view, I'm definitely not the one who will be just apologetic. I think that it is also quite wrong thing to do. I don't think that situation in Montenegro is ideal or perfect. Far from that. I think we have to do a lot more to be able to say, well, now I think our system is really competitive, should serve as a model to be exported elsewhere. But we have worked quite hard to make Montenegro business attractive, to implement action plans which should bring Montenegro into, I don't know, top 50 or top 30, for example, from the World Bank's doing business point of view. Our tax policy is quite competitive with corporate and personal income tax standing at 9% and so on. But there is definitely more to be done. And what I'd like to see Montenegro develop in Montenegro is a certain hub of research and development, certain hub of technological parks and centers of excellence, so that Montenegro could actually take advantage of its geographic position, of its good neighborly relations, of its strong aspiration to become full-fledged member of the European and NATO family. And by doing so, I think we need to bring in more dynamics into the system. What I'm actually concerned about, for example, in Montenegro is that there is a relatively low percentage of active labor force out of the labor force in total. And that suggests that there is certain structural disbalance we have to deal with in the long run. And that's why one of the priorities is to provide young people chances, even to try to innovate with certain models of employment, apprenticeships, and other possibilities, all in attempts to make our system more dynamic, more entrepreneurial. I think that's probably the best response from the micro point of view that helps settle macro issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's about time for us to wrap up this very interesting conversation during which you managed to cover very large range of topics, from social justice to financial crisis, defense cooperation, political and security challenges that your country and entire regions were facing or are still facing. So in hope that you will have a very pleasant and successful stay, I will thank you now for your contribution to our Young Atlanticist Summit.
Thank you. I'm privileged to be here with you. Thank you.
Could I ask everyone to please stay in their seats while we get the delegation out? Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who went to the ball game last night and learned about the American tradition of the seventh inning stretch, I'm not going to sing, but this is the seventh inning stretch. And please stay here because we have heard that our next speaker, Foreign Minister Bildt, is already on his way. So we'll have the coffee break right after he leaves at 4:30, okay? Please stay here in this room, stretch, be seated in about 7 minutes or so. Thank you.